Good evening, everyone. So today I'm here to talk to you about this one question, which our generation in particular, that is Gen Next, definitely needs to address and ponder about, which is why success shouldn't be measured or gauged relatively. Unknown to most of us, because of this competitive environment in which we're brought up in, forced to survive, live, and compete in, we look at success very objectively, but we look at it very relatively. It's not entirely our fault. We haven't been exposed to any other alternative way of looking at success. So you have this athlete A who has this 100-meter race coming up in about 3 months. So, like any good athlete, he starts his preparation much in advance. When he takes to the track for the first time before he starts his practice, finishing the race in a particular time period, let's just say X, let's just say the time period is X, seems impossible and inconceivable to him. Let me make this simpler. This athlete A, before this preparation, could finish the 100-meter race in about 10 seconds. So when he takes to the track, finishing the race in about 9.85 seconds seems almost impossible to him. It's completely out of the equation. So for these 3 months, he works day in and day out, works tirelessly, goes that extra mile, and finally, when he reaches this benchmark, or probably even breaches that, he probably finishes the race in a 9.83 seconds. The immense satisfaction and pleasure he experiences then is what is known as success, when you look at it from a wholesome perspective. See, you could also look at it in this manner. Whenever you actually reach that level, whenever you actually succeed, you can't exactly describe the emotion you're experiencing then. So that feeling which you experience then, which helps you sleep well at night and heave a huge sigh of relief, is what is known as success when you look at it from a wholesome perspective. I would want all of you to honestly ask yourself this question. Are we actually gauging and looking at success, keeping this model in mind? Are we actually looking at it from this perspective? In most cases, the answer is sadly a no. It's because relativity has entered the equation. Today, the parameter for measuring one's success has become how one fares when compared to the other person. One's level of success and how well a person does a particular job or does a particular task depends or is basically determined by comparing his performance to that of his competition pool, his contemporaries, and competitors. Let me tell you this one thing from personal experience. The aim or objective when you look at success from this relative approach is to be the best in that competition field you're competing in, to be the best in that limited existing competition pool. But when you adopt this approach, let me tell you one thing. This is going to be an endless struggle. This is going to be like you waging a war. But sadly, this war is not going to come to an end anytime soon. It's not going to end anytime in the near future. So this approach or idea of looking at success relatively is prevalent in almost all spheres of life. So I'll take the most common example, that is student life, something which all of us can relate to. Again, you have the student A. He has his exams coming up. And then he wants to do the best in his class. He wants to fare best in his exams. But what he means by best is entirely different from how you and me perceive what best is. By best, he wants to do better than his fiercest competitor, student B, who came first in the previous exam. So he focuses all his energies, expends all his resources, puts all his concentration into doing better than that one student B, because he believes that by doing so, he will dislodge B from the top position and probably become the first ranker in his class. See, when you look at success from a wholesome perspective, you are consistently and constantly improving your own efforts. You recognize your weaknesses, your shortcomings, your inadequacies, and you work on improving them. So it's constantly a work in progress. So if you adopt that approach with respect to this exam scenario, there's a high probability you'll end up first more often than not. Because you realize where you're falling short and you will work on it. And naturally, if you keep this approach intact, you will get better. So now, I would want all of you to just have a look in, or I would want you to grasp the kind of emotions a person who looks at success from a relative perspective actually experiences. See, this is what he experiences. When he reaches that benchmark or target of his, when he actually reaches that goal he had set for himself, he experiences immense happiness, untold pleasure. His joy knows no bounds. But sadly for him, this is short-lived. What he actually experiences is this. This is the sad reality which he is unaware of. See, simply put, you can look at it this way. This is how he is when he reaches his target, the image to the left. He's extremely happy. But the sad reality is this is how he's going to remain in the long run. The image you have beside the cartoon. So now let's examine the mindset of a person, or let's look into the mind of a person who looks at success relatively or from a relative perspective. See, the idea, aim, or the ulterior objective of looking at success relatively is to be the best amongst the competition field you have, whoever your competitors might be, in whichever stage of life you are in. So there is this other important thing which they ignore most of the time. See, as I already told you before, when you look at this existing competition field, you particularly focus your attention on that one fierce competitor of yours whom you definitely want to do better than. Like as I said, student A and student B. That one competitor whom you believe can actually beat you. But the sad part is, or the eventual reality is that one fierce competitor of our protagonist is not going to remain in his prime all the time. His purple patch is not going to extend indefinitely. Over a period of time, he will lose his sheen. So that doesn't mean the task of our protagonist is cut out or it all becomes very simple for him. The sad part for him is that every now and then, there'll be this one guy who will come painfully close to doing better than you, who will actually motivate you to work tirelessly, fight tooth and nail to ensure that your position at the top is guaranteed. Now here comes the second sad part. Sadly, it doesn't end with this one person as well. This is a loop. A cycle which is going to go on forever. Throughout your life, you will encounter people who will always give you a tough fight, who will make it really difficult for you to hang on to that particular position at the top. That's what is eventually going to happen. But when you look at success relatively, this is something which you tend to overlook. And now coming back to our protagonist, his work is constantly going to be a work in progress. But is this work in progress actually happening in the right direction? Because his work, this concerted effort he's putting in, will not even yield a single moment of relaxation. He can't sit back, enjoy, and admire the work he's done, be proud of his efforts, until he does better than his competitor. There is no satisfaction, no pleasure, definitely no sign of relief. No sigh of relief. The only time he'll probably experience satisfaction is when he does better than his competitor. But how long is that going to last? Is it actually going to make him happy in the long run? I'll let you figure that yourself. Think about it. Is he actually going to be happy, relieved, at peace with himself in the long run? Sadly for him, the two emotions which he's primarily going to be enveloped by are insecurity and distress. Insecurity, that his position at the top is not guaranteed. And distress, thinking about the mere possibility that someone might do better than me. That itself will not let me rest at peace. So now after hearing all this, do you think actually putting in so much effort to undergo this turmoil is worth it? Do you think adopting this approach is actually going to earn you dividends in the long run? Short term, yes, as I told you, untold pleasure. Long term, you can't have a single moment of peace where you can sit back and relax. This is one problem you'll definitely encounter when you look at success relatively. But this is something, I guess, which is more or less evident. So let me run to some things which we generally overlook. See, if it's a voluntary task which you're doing, if it's a voluntary job you're doing, what actually motivates you or drives you to go back to doing the same thing day after day? See, when you look at success from a wholesome perspective, as I told you before, you only have this one thought running in your head. You constantly want to get better. Like your efforts, your progress is going to be like a graph, but this graph is only going to be an upward slope. Because see, when you actually look at success from a wholesome perspective, you set certain targets for yourself. But then once you breach those targets, your confidence, your motivation, that actually gets reinforced. It gets reinforced and you want to do better. So you try to do better. Again, here it's constantly a work in progress, but with the ultimate objective of doing better than what you were yesterday. Whereas if you look at success from a relative perspective, but before coming to that, let me put one thing very clear. No matter how you look at success, there is no substitute for hard work. So in both cases, you have to work extremely hard. But the dimensions in each case are entirely different. So when you look at success relatively, you have this one aim or objective of being the best. So eventually there'll be this one stage where you're better than most of your competitors. You know you're better than most of your competitors. So what motivates you to go back to doing the same thing every day? What you'll eventually encounter is boredom, because you don't have anything to test your skills against. When you look at success relatively, You're constantly testing your skills, though it is in the wrong manner. You're testing it against your competitor. But in this case, that is not going to happen because you know you're better than the best. So what actually motivates you to go back? You will technically encounter boredom. And sadly, boredom is not the only thing. Because when you're not constantly testing your skills, when you're not constantly brushing them, there will be this other competitor of yours, there will be competition who will probably do better than you. And you can't accept failure. So what you're going to encounter is rejection. Yeah, I know it doesn't seem too bright, but yeah, what you're going to encounter is rejection. Now, coming to the crux of my speech. This is what actually motivated me to take up this topic in the first place. Yes, I've been in this position before. I've had personal experiences which can relate to the same. But more than anything else, this is one reason which actually motivated me to discuss the same with all of you. When you look at success relatively, you cannot unearth your own potential. You don't have the slightest idea of what you're capable of, or the peaks you could probably scale, or the depths you can discover. You literally have no idea about the limitless possibilities which lie ahead of you, which you can possibly grasp and make the most of, but you're very, very, very unaware. See, I'll tell you why. There's a very simple reasoning behind this. When you look at success from a wholesome perspective, you know your shortcomings, you know your weaknesses, you know where you're falling short. So you constantly work to do better. So you analyze your performance. What I'm ultimately trying to get at is that when you look at success from a wholesome perspective, you analyze your performance. You not only look at your strengths, but you also look at your weaknesses. Because the only idea you have in mind is to get better. But now let's come to what I've been talking to you about this far, which is the relative perspective. You only look at your shortcomings or your weaknesses or where you faltered when you don't do as well as your competitor. These are some kind of thoughts which run in your head. Why didn't I do as well as him? Where did he do better that I didn't? What could I have done better to actually beat him? What made me falter in front of him? Even in those thoughts, you always have your competitor. You can make out these pronouns, right? You have him, you have he. You just can't keep that thought aside. But then when you do better than your competition, you reach that benchmark, then that's it. Your joy knows no bounds and there is no looking back. There's no reason why you're actually going to look back at your weaknesses. You will bask in the glory of that moment and that will finish it. You'll probably improve on your strengths when you face competitors. But when it comes to these weaknesses, they will gradually evolve into vulnerabilities and become chinks in your armor. That is what is ultimately going to happen. And now, I would like to take the example of two extremely famous sports persons to elucidate the same. One of them is a Jamaican. You must have guessed who that is by now. And the second is an Indian sports person. Hopefully, that will keep you guessing for a while. So now coming to the Jamaican sports person. It is none other than Sprint King Usain Bolt. So let's go back to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the day of the 100-meter final. Okay, it's the day of the 100-meter final. If Usain Bolt had to win the race that day, he would have to finish the race sub 9.72 seconds. Because until then, the world record was held by Asafa Powell. And that was when he was at his prime. That is when he was having the best day of his life. So considering he again has his best day of his life, which may or may not be a possibility, Usain Bolt would have to finish the race in a sub 9.72 seconds. See, when it comes to the Olympics, setting a world record isn't the only thing that matters. Winning a gold medal is equally significant. Ask a nation like India, we'll tell you the significance of winning a gold medal. Now coming back to the example of Usain Bolt. So if he had to win the race, it was very simple. Finish it within sub 9.72 seconds. But Usain Bolt wasn't one of those people who actually looked at success from a relative perspective. If you actually look at the way he runs, if you look at the clips of how he runs and finishes his race, you know what kind of a perspective and approach he adopts. Usain Bolt immensely backs himself. When you look at him run, you only have this one feeling, saying that he knows that he is his only biggest and real competition. Before finishing every race, he'll actually look back and examine all his competitors as to where they are, because he knows he's going to be ahead of all of them. So he'll look back and see where they are. That's how much he backs himself. That is because he believes that he's his biggest competitor and he has to get better. Which means what? He looks at success from a wholesome perspective. Had it not been for this approach of his, 9.58 seconds definitely wouldn't have been a reality today, and we wouldn't be calling him the fastest man alive. Had you asked me today, had Usain Bolt not broken that record then, set the record then, and had you asked me today if 9.58 was a human possibility, I definitely would have said no. I would have literally tagged that as ridiculous because I wouldn't have imagined something of that sort. There are these two glaring misconceptions. The first, success needn't necessarily be associated with flamboyant, extravagant, larger than life achievements. And two, success needn't be dictated by societal perceptions. See, success is an individual parameter and is subject to various kinds of interpretation. You might have different notions of success, while I might have different notions of success. But both these notions are right in their own sense. This is something we definitely have to realize. And two, how society perceives success is not ultimately the right definition of success. I'll give you this other example. This is something which most of us can relate to. You have a math exam coming up. You have this student who is particularly bad at math. He scores around a 50, a 60 out of 100. So he decides this one time that he's going to work hard, that he's going to put in a lot of effort and do better. So he prepares really hard for his exam and he scores around an 80 in math, an 80-ish in math out of 100. That still means nothing to anybody around him. That isn't anything significant because he's still somewhere in the middle of the class. There are 16 people who've scored better than him, who are ahead of him. His teacher surprisingly doesn't mark or notice that progress. So the society isn't even concerned about what he's actually done. But for him, from a very personal perspective, he's actually achieved a lot. He's reached that parameter, that benchmark he set for himself, and he's justified his potential and caliber. He's actually worked hard and realized his goal. This is what ultimately matters. Because it is not going to end there. Now that he's reached that, he's going to set the benchmark higher. And he's going to do even better now. See, your levels of success need not necessarily appease society. They don't have to please society. See, you might not set an extremely high goal, you might not set an extremely high aim or ambition for yourself. But ultimately, that thing matters to you. It need not necessarily matter to society. Because as I took the example of this student before, when he keeps on bettering that benchmark, he's going to get better and better until one day he's the best. And then society will be forced to make note of him, will be forced to recognize him. So one thing I would suggest is don't concentrate your energies onto following the conventional notions of success or the conventional success models which society has prescribed for you. Be original, be individual, be ingenious, and set your own models of success. This is something which I would definitely advise every one of you, because sooner than later, society will be forced to take note of you. Appease yourself. Society will automatically be appeased in a while. Always appease yourself. So before winding up, I would like to leave all of you with these few words. These would be my last few words. Always realize that your only true and real competition lies within. Always get up with the aim and objective of doing better than how you did yesterday. And remember this one thing. Always keep pushing that benchmark of yours higher and higher. Thank you.